Welcome to the Convergence Podcast. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanan.
A lot of leaders, especially in large organizations, tend to function as bottlenecks for process improvement, and that's not just true in the AI space or in the data space. That's true of any process.
On this show, we'll deconstruct the best practices, principles, and the underlying philosophies behind the most engaged product teams who ship the most successful products. This is what teams are made of.
Hey folks, welcome back to Convergence.fm. Our guest today is David Cohen, and he's an expert on data and AI strategy. And together we talk about the top 5 mistakes that leaders make when rolling out their data strategy and getting AI ready. We're also doing something just a little bit different in the format of this episode. Now, David and I are both nerds around facilitating workshops. So rather than just talking about facilitation, we decided to show it to you. What you're about to hear or watch is a lightly edited workshop that we ran together to unpack the top 5 problems that leaders face when trying to get AI ready with your data strategy. And before we get into it, I did want to touch a little bit about facilitation, because I think it really frames the conversation and it's a very powerful tool that you might introduce into your team. To me, facilitation is around being intentional. It's about how we help a group make complex decisions that require real consideration, trade-offs, and focus. It's a system for prioritizing our limited time, energy, and resources so we can identify the most telling experiments in service of solving the problems that matter the most. It's less about having all the answers and more about creating the conditions where the best thinking and decision-making can emerge and especially get acted on. It is the most overlooked de-risking technique, I think, in my experience. And that's exactly what David and I are doing here today. Now, about David, he's got a deep background in AI and data consulting. He's worked with Fortune 500 clients across industries like healthcare, energy, and telco. And some of his clients include British Petroleum, AT&T, and Disney. And now he's the founder of a firm, Superposition, where he builds and runs collaborative workshops that help consultancies scope and deliver complex AI and data projects. So the episode leans into that expertise, as well as we get to have a little fun with facilitation. You'll hear us pull real examples from healthcare, financial services, and automotive. We'll debate whether data should be treated as a support function or as a line of business. And we also get tactical about how to handle issues like governance, prioritization, and unrealistic timelines and road mapping that tends to emerge. Think of this like a live episode of your favorite cooking show. We have trimmed out the long stretches of silent brainstorming, but everything else is basically in here. If you've ever wondered about what a facilitation process actually looks or sounds like, or how to make your AI strategy more grounded and actionable for your team, you get a little taste of that facilitation, and we go deep into how to de-risk your AI strategy. Let's get into it with David Cohen from Superposition.
Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube.
The first thing I want to do is, given all this experience that you have working in Fortune 500 and smaller firms with helping people with workshops around data strategy, I'm going to set a 5-minute timer here, and for you to list out all the things that you see people tend to, in your opinion, make mistakes around when it comes to data strategy. So here's my timer. While David's populating this list, I'm going to provide some sort of meta tips if you're trying to run a facilitation at home or at work. Initially, quantity is way better than quality when it comes to this kind of generative thinking or what the design thinking world calls divergent thinking. So it's better to even write down the bad ideas and just let your mind open to it. Part of the reason why I like setting a timer is I think there's something that goes off in our brain where when there's a time limit, it sort of forces us to not overthink or self-censor, where we end up just coming up with more ideas at first. And since we have this ability to filter later, doing all the things we can to help us generate more and more quantity initially. If we were doing this as a retreat, I would have all of the divergent thinking as the maybe like beer and cannabis day, because we know that we're going to have a coffee day the next day to do the filtration and the focus work. So that's facilitation tip number 1 that I have for you as we're playing along here. And that's about 5 minutes. So how'd you do there?
It was it's weird kind of being on this side of the facilitation prompt. It's a little scary, man. It's sometimes a little hard to come up with ideas. So I'm glad to get to experience it for once.
Yeah, for sure. You have a better sense of what your participants go through and you see how you can tweak things, right?
Yeah.
So now that you've got a ton of ideas, we're going for quantity over quality first. What I'm going to ask you to do is just kind of have what we call a self-selection or a self-filtering, where you look at them yourself and maybe create 2 piles of them. One is like the ones that you feel like are really important, ones that really resonate with you. And then the other one is maybe like the secondary ones that are important, but not quite as the really important pile. So let's get the good and the great pile going if you want to split the ones that you have up into 2.
Okay, I have 10, so I'll do 5 and 5.
Perfect. All right, so you've got them into the good pile and the great pile?
Mm-hmm. I do.
All right, so I want you to be really careful now and pick the good pile of the 2.
Okay. What should I do with it?
And rip it up.
No.
I know it's a hard part of this.
I was hoping you wouldn't say that.
But a lot of, I think, what the goal of facilitation and what we look for here is to really try and preserve our focus and clarity.
Yeah.
And since you've already done the hard work of separating them into piles, that gives us and the audience the chance to hear the really important ones. And the next thing I want you to do is try and stack rank the great pile that you have. I think you mentioned you had 5 and 5. So if you want to try and get those going 1 through 5. For the audience there, this can be kind of hard to do if you try and guess which one's going to be 1 and which one's going to be 5 as you look at them. What I find to be a little bit easier sometimes is just taking an arbitrary one and putting it in the middle of your stack, and then take the next one and decide if it should go above the first one or below it. And then now you've created 3 openings where the third one can go, and you can kind of just have to do relative comparisons versus trying to do a more multivariate version of assigning 5 ratings to each of them. And then voila, by the end, you'll hopefully end up with a stack rank that you agree with, and you can kind of self-select. So you've done the second hard work of looking at your great stack and stack ranking them of what you think are most important to least important. I think we've got 5. So at this point, I'd love to know, in terms of the most pressing problems or the most common problems that you tend to see in your work around what people make mistakes around, or the problems around AI and data strategy.
Yeah.
What are your top 5?
So number 1, by far, no leadership buy-in. That's easily the biggest problem. Okay, so number 2, the second biggest problem is not listening to your team as a leader. So essentially, as the spearhead of the initiative to bring in data, to modernize data or bring in AI, not listening to your team what it actually needs. Number 3, having unrealistic expectations and timelines for the implementation of the things that we talked about in 1 and 2. Number 4 is, it says governance, but what I mean by this is not defining governance programs around the implementation or rebuilding of either your data or building AI systems within your organization in the first place. And then 5, this is more on the AI side, but falling to social pressure. So essentially, letting yourself as a leader make decisions based on factors are not relevant to your organization and how it grows, but rather what the market is telling you and what others are pressuring you to do in either your social circle as a leader or within your organization in directions that your team doesn't need to grow. So that's my 5.
Awesome. Well, thanks for humoring that. And now what I like to do is, maybe from a meta standpoint, spending more time trying to solve the most critical problems are likely going to avoid the kind of really bad implications and give you the most juice to squeeze or the most mileage on the solutioning side of things. And as much as it clearly pained you to rip up half of those sticky notes, and then you had to do the hard work of prioritizing these, if we have an extra hour in our time, or if we need to really improve our AI and data strategy, now we've made a stack rank of the problems that are going to give us the most improvements if we try and solve them, versus trying to spread our time equally across all of the problems that we could possibly solve. So I think the first one that you had at the top of your list was no leadership buy-in. And the next thing that we could do is trying to solution these in a variety of ways. We can go back to sticky notes and maybe let's do that. And at this point, I'll try and jump in, especially for the ones that are not very specific to AI and data strategy, like no leadership buy-in, and try and talk through 5 solutions each of what might help with organizations that are at risk of not having leadership buy-in. I'll let you go first, and if I have a similar one, I'll add on, and then we can go to any ones that we didn't cover that I have on my list second. So in terms of solutions for the big problem of no leadership buy-in to de-risk your AI and data strategy, what are some things that come to mind for you, David?
Yeah, so as far as solutions go, one is sort of a organizational or process-oriented one. So this sticky says not treating data and AI functions as a support or unimportant priority for the organization. So what I mean by that is that this is a problem that has existed for decades, for as long as data has been a recognized function in corporate organizations, is that they get siloed or centered around other functions like finance, like operations, as opposed to a standalone function that needs to be understood in its impact to the business. So the solution is to, from a leadership buy-in perspective, to start thinking of them as a standalone function of their own operationally, such that at a leadership level, you can understand what the value of the activities are and truly buy into why they're going to be impactful to your organization in the first place.
So I have this is something I've wondered about. There's a fairly big automotive company that I've worked with that has their own kind of line of business for data, in contrast to maybe IT that was more like a support function.
Yeah.
Right. And we'd constantly wonder whether data should be a line of business. And my argument that was against it was that in order for it to be a line of business, it needs to have a P&L. In order for it to have a profit and loss, it needs to generate some form of revenue as a standalone, as opposed to serving up data that enables other parts of the business, maybe like marketing or product, to be able to generate revenue of theirs. And that's where I felt like it was more of a shared service. And I'm wondering what you think about that, or if you maybe want to like debate that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we hear quite a bit, right? Like obviously the P&L argument being the primary driver for whether something is a support function or not. I think what a lot of people in the data world would argue particularly is that we can very easily track the monetary value of data not being available in some degree. Especially what we can track is the opportunity cost of data, right? Essentially. So while traditionally like most companies don't sell or monetize their data, not in the way that at least bigger ones do. The monetary value of it is clear enough that I think it essentially sets the argument for like why it can be understood as an organized or simplified function, is that even if it's not revenue generating, it's still understood as like managing the bottom line of the company in one direction or the other.
One thing that has been a challenge historically for other debates similar to this is attribution of value.
Yeah.
And in this case, the data team is hopefully has a disproportionate superpower to be able to showcase where their value is attributed and where it isn't. I'll take that argument there. And I had a related sticky note here for me, which is that the accountability of the team, the data team, or the data product is stated in the lens of a business or customer impact. Mm-hmm. And that's something we sometimes forget. And I think we get kind of caught up in the weeds of data infrastructure while losing sight of the plot of what kind of business impact or customer impact that this has, which then leads to it being prioritized at the right place in the business, as well as I think from a teaming standpoint, gets your teammates a lot more bought in and engaged in the work if you can see what this is really doing and how you can explain this to your 4-year-old child or your grandmother versus something being, hyper technical. What's the next solution that you have for no leadership buy-in?
So the second one is, again, more of a people-oriented solution. It says not dismissing the unknown due to the lack of knowledge that exists around data, right? So something that happens at an organizational level, especially with more traditional businesses that are not data-driven, is their buzzword that we like to use, is that there is a dismissal of the opportunity or the possibility of using data in order to understand that opportunity cost that we were talking about before. So I think there's like just an openness to trying out a new approach, or just even now in the age of AI, to just experiment that needs to exist in order for an organization to be successful in this front.
Yeah. And do you have an example to help us out with that a little bit?
So one of the scenarios in which I do my work is to ideate AI use cases essentially through the workshops that I create. In a previous client in the health space, one of the scenarios that we wanted to create was to use a workshop to ideate the possible future of building with AI. To do that, we need to generate a mountain of ideas, as we are doing in this session today, in order to essentially narrow down into 1 or 2 ideas that are feasible. That isn't possible at a leadership level if leadership doesn't come into that conversation bought into the perspective of using and navigating the unknown as a tool to narrow down into the specifics. Like if leadership is completely closed down to the fact that they're going to have to feel uncomfortable and they're going to have to have a tough conversation about where their data's at, what value AI has to them, what it means for their organization, the rest of it is not happening. And so in that client, one of the things that was most successful and productive was that the leadership that we were engaging with had a perspective of, hey, we're an open book. Let's try anything. We are in the situation where we are trying to capture as much value from our data as possible. We are trying to capture as much AI opportunity as we can through like a moment that they recognized as important in the market. And they went into it with an open mind, right? And that helped a lot in terms of, as we are doing right now, of just ideating and defining the future.
And I've got one here that says getting the right leader in the work with the team, which feels kind of related, where I think you mentioned traditional organization. And if you think about kind of an archetype of the organization, and by a subset, the folks who tend to be pretty good there, bigger companies that have been around for longer tend to kind of have a lot more certainty in their operations versus startups that are traversing the uncertainty. Yeah. And so you're looking for a leader here who can kind of play both roles. They can integrate well into the mothership and give some level of predictability to the traditional stakeholders. But at the same time, being able to kind of change the language of the certainty of, instead of saying we'll be able to get to this many customers or this much revenue, and those kind of commitments that you're used to in the old business world where you can predict those things with high precision, you're saying, hey, we'll do this many experiments, or we have this many customer touch points, which still carries some level of uncertainty, but gives you some level of buffer of being able to go out and ideate outside of this box versus having to stick within something that is going to generate revenue in the short term or profit in the short term, which almost by definition is going to kill a lot of the ideas that might require a little bit of investment or time or patience or learning before you start to see some of the hard dollars behind it.
Yeah, and it actually ties to my last sticky, which I guess I can reveal now since it's related, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
So the last one says capture momentum when it hits and overcome inertia. So I think it's like essentially talking about many of the factors that you're talking about, that in a large traditional organization especially, there's some degree of organizational momentum that has to be overcome in order to just try things. And capturing that from a leadership perspective when you see the opportunity is number one tip. Right, like as you said, identifying the right leaders to move that forward, being a good advocate for that process of experimentation, as we were talking about prior, but also just driving the conversation forward to just try new things, right? And understanding that the process is going to feel uncomfortable and it's going to take a little bit of friction in order to get the snowball rolling and capture real value out of the work that we're talking about.
Yeah, big time. Something that feels related here. One of the things that brought me to Michigan from Toronto was to help Ford Motor Company with starting something called Ford Labs. And we sort of intentionally, and this is pre-COVID where we had real estate and everything, and we intentionally devised this lab at an arm's length away, about a 35-minute drive away from the headquarters. There's a lot of benefits. It was in Ann Arbor, close to the University of Michigan, so we had access to talent and stuff. But we also wanted to look at different spots, whether it was downtown Detroit or Ann Arbor, that was far enough away that only the folks who are really bought into this new process would be willing to kind of hand raise and say, hey, yeah, I want to work out of this different office because I believe in this way of working more, as opposed to someone who might be attracted to the shiny object aspect of it that wouldn't be willing to kind of traverse some of the hard pieces of integration that naturally come with trying to do something like a lab or a Silicon Valley style software team in this case inside a large auto company. And then the last one I had for the leadership buy-in one is sort of contradictory, and I'm curious to know your take on it. And one of them says where we assign leadership within the sub-entity or initiative that is given both the authority around what decisions they're allowed to make, as well as the autonomy to make those without permission. And at the same time, like leadership outside of that, not micromanaging them for things that are within that box, and holding them accountable to something we talked about earlier of kind of, experimentation, signs of progress, or signs of progress that are maybe early indicators of revenues and profits to come in later on.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing that the sort of dynamic that we always navigate in this space is managing ego, right? And kind of leaving that at the door, as you said, from the perspective of empowering your team. A lot of leaders, especially in large organizations, tend to function as bottlenecks for process improvement, and that's not just true in the AI space or in the data space. That's true of any process. And in this case, it's very much relevant, right? Like having the ability to just delegate and say, like, "Hey, go try this out and see where it goes. You have my buy-in," is infinitely better move than being the one that has to make the decision and having to rubber stamp everything that comes through. It's just, a force.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show.
All right, we're going to transition to the next most important problem that arose when it came to data and AI strategy. And we're going to think of some solutions when it comes to the problem of not listening to the team as a leader. So we've had a chance to ideate some of the solutions that can overcome the problem of leaders not listening to their team, which is a key problem in getting successful results from your AI and data strategy. So what do you got there?
I'll tell you a story from another previous client that'll be relevant to this. When you work in a large organization, such as the client that I was serving, that was in the financial services space, and traditionally in organization, or rather in industries that are more traditional and have been around for a while, have processes that are sort of not set in stone, but have also been around for a long time, it's difficult to get new perspectives that can improve process. And especially as we navigate now the world where everybody is interested in AI and everybody has like an opinion on it or like, they want it. It requires understanding from a data perspective whether you are ready to meet that moment. And then if you don't have the person or the location, the avenue to hear from your team and understand the reality of where you are, like this client that I was working with, we had to create a setting to bring different parts of the organization together and discuss the realities of the entirety of their infrastructure, right? Everything that supports the creation of AI tools to begin with, so that you can hear from the COO and the CFO, as well as the chief data officer and the chief information officer, around all the different factors that kind of bleed into potentially building a tool with AI or building a new data system or whatever, is that it requires to hear different perspectives than the ones you've heard and to think about the processes outside of where you know them, because otherwise you're just going to run into the same problems you always do. So having the ability to hear different perspectives than normally you would and kind of have that, I never thought about that sort of moment is what you want to do as a leader.
This is kind of like, call it the Easter egg or the double jeopardy one that I had as well, where I said workshop facilitation is a great way to force that. It could be that the problem is that you mentioned earlier with ego. It could be that this is a team you're working with that doesn't necessarily speak up. And I think these techniques can kind of force the ideas to surface from even the more shy folks, maybe the more introverted folks on the team, and get the best ideas to the top. Some of the nerdy things that I think are worth mentioning now are, using sticky notes and having folks kind of do silent work to idea generate, like we're showing you right now. Some of the other things we like to do are using the same color sticky notes for everybody. So there isn't a certain color that the boss uses and everybody else uses. We ask everybody to write in capital letters because it makes it easier for everybody else to read, but also it's harder to discern whose handwriting it is. And then other things like dot voting, Roman voting and stuff really make it harder to kind of guess what the boss wants and try and appease them versus truly having to think about the problem and what you feel like the most feasible or viable solutions are. So I love that one, obviously, and a big part of why I wanted to have you on the show. What else do you have in terms of solutions for the problem of not listening to your team as a leader?
Yeah, this is you just made me change it because what you said made me think about it. This sounds so elementary, but it says speak last. So you as the leader in a setting like the one we're describing where you are trying to listen to people's perspectives, what you don't realize often, and that you and I see in these facilitated settings, is that people's answers tend to anchor around what their leader brings to the table. So if you as the leader say, I don't think that's a good idea, everybody else around the room that is subordinate to you or that works for you is going to anchor around that idea, whether or not you have a good team. Like, it's just human nature to anchor. So being and forcibly making yourself not the center of the discussion is an infinitely stronger tool than most people would realize. And I think it's counterintuitive to how most leaders are sort of taught or expected to lead, which is lead by example or lead first. Where in this case, it's providing your team the room in that workshop setting or otherwise to talk, to just like actually express their opinion without you coloring it first. I think it's something that I've read some big time corporate leaders also try to do, of like being the last one to speak in the room so that everybody else gets heard. But it really makes a massive difference in how these facilitated settings generate ideas when the leader of the room either does not participate or participates less.
Something that came up, I ran a workshop yesterday for a CEO and COO, and they're a smaller organization. They had about 20 employees. And at the end of each of these workshops, I ask for like a plus delta L, which is like, hey, what's something you liked about the way I facilitated? What's something I could do better to be world-class? And what's the most meaningful thing you learned? And one of the deltas that came up yesterday was that we didn't give them enough homework to sort of think about some of the ideation beforehand so they could discuss it amongst themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, they're a very different culture than the companies I think we're talking about, where I intentionally didn't give them the prompt beforehand because I didn't want the CEO to influence the COO's ideas.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to generate them separately. But in this case, they were already working with a culture where the CEO understood the value of having like their counterbalance on the team. And they wanted to spend that time sort of with friction and ideation as opposed to trying to sort of politic their idea being the right idea.
Yeah.
So that was kind of an aha moment about the different companies and different cultures where this speaking last has more value than others. What's the next one that you have there?
So the third one, last one, says build in regular touch points. I think that from a leadership perspective, and we talked about creating the settings to hear new perspectives. I think creating a routine around, having a place to talk about what's going wrong, what's not working, and what you need to watch out for, or what opportunities there are as a leader, especially in the data space and in the AI world, which is changing so fast, is critical, right? Like there is no way of responding adaptively as a large organization to the AI world. There just isn't. It moves too fast. So the best you can do is have spaces where you can at least understand the playing field in a more adaptive fashion than most organizations do. And I think that's where I landed on it.
I like that. I've got a similar one that says demo early and often.
Yeah.
And this isn't necessarily just product demos. It's any progress. And at large companies, I think folks are used to getting large amounts of data synthesized into bullet points, into decks that are a function of process. And in the early days of innovation, I think that synthesis loses a lot of context along the way. And something like a weekly demo that may seem like a huge time investment actually pays off in the long term because you get to understand so much more of what's going on. I highly encourage leaders to sit in on customer research interviews, or if they can't, if the scheduling doesn't work, then take the time to listen to the entire recording, because you're not just seeing the notes of that customer research, you're getting to hear the emotions of this prospective customer, how their energy level changes based on different things they're talking. And those things can really help us respond to the emotions of our customers more than bullet points can necessarily transfer. And I agree, having regular touch points to do this download, as well as provide updates on progress, that we can provide more support, naturally will create this conversation, I think, that can de-risk you from not listening to your team.
Yep.
And then the last one I had is maybe not kind of here, maybe more on the governance side, but having leaders assigned that are more player coaches.
Yeah.
I think, we're evolving out of the MBA leader and back to kind of the builder leader, and having someone who can roll up their sleeves and kind of do some of these customer research or building or data architecture themselves. And I'd argue that, folks who are even post-technical can do a lot more today with the AI assistant tools. And so assigning folks who are comfortable to be vulnerable enough to go back to kind of looking like they don't know everything, but also willing to spend time building stuff themselves alongside the team. And that player coach idea is another way to de-risk a leader who doesn't listen to their team because you're on the team yourself.
Yeah, one thing that I think a lot of leaders discount too, especially in more technical spaces, is that having normal people try things out and breaking them is often a very good source of feedback in sense of like you're building for end users, you're building for somebody. So the like just listening to technical folks in the design process leads to blind spots in how that gets designed. And the player coach analogy, right, helps in that it essentially motivates other people in the team to get involved and try things out.
I love it. All right, so we're going to switch to the third problem here, which is unrealistic expectations and timelines. So we're going to take a second to come up with 3 solutions to that problem that can add risk to your AI and data strategy. All right, what do you have?
So my first one is survey the legal and logistical landscape. That's what it says. What I mean by that is in the context of the examples I gave you earlier, where we talked about that financial services client I served before, and then the healthcare one, those are both very regulated industries. So to some degree, in terms of data work and how AI work gets enabled for both, there are complications, right? Like there's factors outside of what the organization can even control that need to be considered from just like a planning perspective. So having that be an intrinsic part of the planning of how those tools get built and designed is probably just as important as the like conversation on the merits of the work itself, right? Like in like talking about HIPAA, for instance, in the healthcare space, or just general other like data management and data safety, quality rules in the healthcare space, or similar sort of regulations in the financial aspect in terms of data protection. It's something that gets underestimated until it becomes a problem. So I think it's a major recommendation to build that in terms of how much is it going to take timeline wise, and what should we expect in terms of being realistic about the development of tools and processes in the realities of industries and what they are today.
And I'll say, I'll speak on behalf of these folks who are often seen as gatekeepers,
Yep.
is that it's oftentimes our mistake to not include them in the process earlier. Something that comes to mind from my experiences in a highly FDA regulated space, we chose to include the FDA expert in the ideation process during the discovery phase of week 0 of the product. And he was never invited. And he was able to kind of find the loopholes and everything else of what could be approved and have a back and forth and put some level of guardrails on the team, but give them a window of what can get approved really quickly.
Yeah.
And he talked to us afterwards about, hey, I never get included in this. I'm always the bad guy at the end. And I'm given like 200 pages of stuff to approve. And inevitably, I can't approve it because, especially in the timelines that you need, because you're already running behind, because you gave me no chance to give you my expertise. You only give me a chance to become a gatekeeper. So that applies for branding at big companies. That applies for data governance, HIPAA. Anyone that kind of you think it needs to get approved stuff at the end, have them approve your pencil sketches in the beginning, just like you might do validation with your customer, so you can have no surprises at the end.
Yeah.
One that I have that's kind of similar is, smaller scopes. It's just harder for us to estimate things as things get bigger and more complex. And when you're tightening down your scope, also try to really test out things that are the most risky assumptions in your early prototypes versus having to put in all the things that are going to work.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to get stuff done on time when the scope is smaller. And I think that also helps with just building a language around how long and complex things really are.
Yeah, I think when we do a lot of work, especially around design and kind of refinement, people assume that when we're talking about being iterative, that it means that we are just sort of like writing over our own work over and over, but what we mean is what you just described. So like scoping small pieces such that we can accomplish something and then just make it better over time.
All right. And then the next problem that we have is governance. What are some of the solutions that come around governance? And then, maybe what we can do is also define governance just a little bit here.
Yeah. So most organizations, when they think about governance and data governance in particular, now there's AI governance as well. It's seen as boring work, but it's really foundational to the health of data systems and now AI systems as well. So it's essentially all the processes that define the rules, processes, policies, and then review systems by which data and by extension AI systems get maintained. So essentially like how we define what a metric means, how we define how we validate whether something is correct. In the AI context, it might be whether something's a hallucination or not. Essentially, the human processes and councils, they're usually organized around councils of people that define what correct means, how correct gets validated. Correct, right? Gets validated. Mm-hmm. And most importantly, how that definition evolves over time. So that's what I mean.
And I'm curious, governance sometimes can be something that slows us down a lot. Yep. And then other times is what allows us to go fast and safe. And do you have any advice in terms of how to get the better of those two options?
Yeah, I think the easiest way and like grounded in reality is start fast, grow slow, right? Like to your point about just iterating and kind of getting better at it, is that from a governance perspective, you want to have just a framework to begin with. So like kind of stewards is what we called it in the data context back in the day. I don't know if that term has changed. So people that can help define the rules, the definitions of things, and create a basic framework for managing the governance piece that I was talking about. And then having that evolve naturally as the complexity of the data or AI project evolves too. I think it's the best way to go.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to governance, not knowing where to get started, oftentimes having like a sub-entity like Ford Labs. I know at Honda, we worked with 99P Labs. There's other ones like Capital One Labs and so forth. They give you a little bit of a clean room, if you will, to test out some of these new mindset and then figure out the associated governance where you get both the protection and guardrails that you want, but also enable speed. And doing it in a way before you're kind of betting the farm in really risky, sensitive data in this case, or something that's a really risky product.
Yep.
And doing it on something that has lower lift or risk to develop your ergonomics around your governance, and then figure out a way. Now it's a new challenge of how do you integrate that into the mothership, but it's one way I think that can help you get started.
Yeah, and so my sticky is actually related. It says create a common understanding of the rules and who tracks them, is what it says.
Perfect.
Because to that point, especially, for example, in industries where metrics are maybe disputed, like healthcare, you and I might not agree on what a metric means, even though we are in the same team and the same organization. So that means we're not tracking the same thing. And if we build an AI system that references that metric, it's also not going to track the right thing. So yeah, I mean, tracking the right thing and understanding who's responsible for it is the key.
And that brings us to the last sticky note of the top problems that you have around ways to de-risk your AI and data strategy, which is falling to social pressure. So let's come up with a couple of solutions to that to de-risk it.
So the biggest solution that I have for this is thinking impact first. So thinking beyond yourself, essentially not falling victim to ego, thinking in terms of how you think about enabling data. And especially, this is the reason I put this one down originally is because in the AI world, or in the world where AI is like the biggest thing in corporate America, it is very easy to fall to social pressure of like somebody telling you that you need to do this or that you have to capture this moment. So thinking about what problem you're solving and how to use many of the pieces that we've talked about before to make that real is how you succeed, not just like implementing for its own sake. So that was my sticky.
Yeah, and I've got the business strategy first, and then AI solution second. We almost got to do it in on this episode here, where we were very intentional to talk about the problems first and prioritize those problems that we want to solve, and then spent half the episode talking about solutions only of the problem with the most implication. I think it's a similar problem that executives fall into, and it's the number of times I've heard people want to implement a chatbot because ChatGPT is kind of what they're familiar with as how to get the best out of AI versus thinking about top problems that would keep them more competitive or get them further along in their vision and strategy. And then thinking about second of, okay, now how can AI de-risk this, get us there better, faster, cheaper, and so forth?
Yeah. So we are thinking about the same line, basically.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much, David, for humoring me on this format that we've never tried. There's a few things that I like to ask all of the guests on the show here. And the first one is around, since the podcast is really around fostering engaged teams who build delightful products, I'm curious when it comes to like a team, if there's like an ideal team or a team that, you feel like is really inspirational, either one that you've been on yourself or one that you've maybe heard of, or even a fictional one that you try and aspire towards when you're fostering a team.
Yeah, I think for me, being in consulting, what happens a lot is that you switch teams very frequently, especially when you work in bigger firms. And what you find, like I am always and have always been a very culture first person. So like as far as teams go, I over index for culture in building my teams. So the biggest thing for me as far as building good product or just like be doing good work as an advisor or just in general is to have a team that over indexes on listening to the team, as we talked about, like being collaborative, being open to new ideas, and just generally understanding that whatever we're working on is not the end of the world, right? Like there's always a path forward. There's always a way to figuring it out. And it all just requires conversation. So for me, that's the biggest piece.
The next thing is around products. And I'm curious if there is a product or service that you got to unbox or experience recently that just totally delighted you.
Yeah, I was thinking about this recently, right? Because funny enough, for my own work, I bought these like Lego sets for as far doing a kind of like a use case video for my own clients. But one of the things that I was thinking about as I opened the box is, here, I'll show you actually. So you see this box here? This is a Lego set that I put together.
Yeah.
But what it made me think about is this is a very simple product. It's technically you just put together this bird. You can actually see it here, the bird. But the entire packaging of this thing and how you put it together, the experience of putting it together, like all of it is very carefully crafted in a very like in a way that like almost is so minute and so like detail oriented that you miss it. Like you don't think about the experience of like, oh, I'm going to put together this Lego and I'm going to sit down and have a very relaxing experience of building this thing, and it's packaged and all the pieces are perfectly fit. Because somebody pointed out to me that they tried building a Lego set once with like knockoff parts, and that none of the parts fit and none of the like the things kind of came together, and it's all like a really bad experience. And so it made me think about like a simple children's toy like this and how much time, effort, and thinking goes into the experience of using something like this. And it really inspired me, right? It's like if people that make toys are putting this much effort into something as simple as like putting together this flamingo thing, why shouldn't we put in as much effort to do our own work in the same way?
Absolutely. It's something that I've noticed also about IKEA furniture.
Yeah.
And there's something about maybe that part of the world, that Scandinavian part of the world, that both of the... Actually, we had someone on from Spotify recently, and if you notice that both of those companies have no language in any of their instructions, and they have to find a way to visually depict what the next step is. And that means they don't have to worry about internationalization or anything else. And part of what the Spotify guy said was that, companies like H&M and IKEA and stuff out there just kind of know that for them to make it, they have to survive on a global scale. And so they think global first. from the day of inception, which is something that we don't necessarily have to think about when we have a big market here in the US.
Yeah, and as somebody that specializes in building experiences at the end of the day, like, I build workshops and facilitate them, as do you. So like it's really inspiring to know that other people are thinking about the same things that we're thinking about to a much deeper degree or much more granular degree. And it helps to learn a lot on how they think about these things. Like what are they considering when they're thinking about, like, you opening a stupid cardboard box, which seems so elementary and dumb, but then you actually think about the entire, like, the step-by-step process of what you go through, and you're like, oh man, like, these people actually, like, really care, and they put a lot of thought and heart into the work. So it's very inspiring.
Totally. And then the last thing that I'd love to know is if there's a novel way that you've seen someone use AI recently, whether it's someone on a personal basis or something that you saw at one of the businesses that you work with.
Primarily, my clients are other consultancies, and many of them have now started using AI to, like, really, I'm going to use this overused phrase, but to change the game of how consulting is done. I have learned so much from some of my clients and partners in terms of how they're using AI internally, or AI tools, to just change the way that they're doing work. Like, just the basics of anything from talking to a person, a potential sales lead, to taking notes in a meeting, to, like, generating to-dos, to organizing their teams, and even delivering work to their clients, or like creating a product. It really has changed, and it had not opened my eyes to it until I started working with other consultancies, how much many of them, especially smaller ones, are just trying things, right? Like, going back to the point that we made earlier about trying different things and experimenting, I think it goes really underappreciated how many firms are just experimenting with different ways of doing work. And consulting firms are very well positioned for that, because we do a lot of work in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. So there is room for experimentation. And one of the things that has really inspired me is that many of these firms are just thinking about, like, having fun with these tools, right? Like, it's no longer just, we need to do this because it'll make us more money or because it'll save us money. It's, look, we can do our work better, we can make more money, but we can also enjoy what we're doing more through just removing a lot of the annoying parts of life out of our day to day, which has been very interesting.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, including how I think a lot of these smaller boutique firms are going to have a much easier time competing with the bigger firms because of the additional capacity that AI is going to bring them. That was oftentimes something that held them back compared to folks that just had higher scale. The last thing I'd love to know is if listeners are, there are a lot of boutique consultancies here from either Collective 54 or Kermit Collective and other folks that we've worked with in the past. And I'm curious how you'd like them to get a hold of you to get a workshop run.
So if I'm on LinkedIn, I post every day and share a lot of thoughts on what we talked about today. So I'm happy. I think I can share the link with you if you want to post it or just have it on the screen. I also have a website at superpositionstrat.com. That's STRAT.com. I'll also send you that link. And I have a YouTube channel where I post a lot of videos on a lot of the work that we're discussing as well. It's at Superposition Strat as well on YouTube. So yeah, I mean, if they want to get in touch, anybody, if you're watching and want to learn more about my workshops and how I do my work, reach out on LinkedIn. That's where I'm primarily available, or on my website, and would be happy to chat more.
Sweet. Thank you so much for making time, David. This was super fun.
No, absolutely. Thank you for setting this up.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with David Cohen on Convergence.fm. I did want to leave you with a few facilitation techniques in case you wanted to try these out at home on your team sessions, especially for a decision where the stakes are high and you're not entirely sure where to go next. The first one is to focus on the biggest problems worth solving. It's really easy to get caught up in chasing shiny solutions, especially when it comes to AI. But even if you succeed at solving a problem that does not matter, the success just won't mean as much. There's a quote from Peter Drucker that we come back to a lot, which is that there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. You can have a great team, a clear process, a creative solution, but if you're pointed at the wrong problem, none of that will really move the needle. For example, I would have loved to cover the other 5 stickies that I asked David to rip up, but that means an episode that'd be twice as long and twice as much of your time. And this way, we de-risked the fact that we covered the problems you're most likely to encounter. One of our shared favorites between David and I is to have leaders speak last. If you're in a leadership role, hold your thoughts to the end. You set the tone whether you're intentional about that or not. And speaking too early can steer the room towards your opinion. As a leader, you're really at risk of coloring the ideation towards your favorite ideas, and that stifles your company's ideas to your ideas rather than everything that your team can bring. This is especially risky when your team is ultimately the folks who are most close to your customers, your value creation, your operations, where the ideas are probably aplenty. Another way to get your team talking is with silent ideation, like we did. Give people a few minutes to think and write individually before the discussion begins. It helps surface more thoughtful ideas and give space for the quieter voices on your team. I also, of course, love using sticky notes, whether digital or physical. Write one idea per note and ask folks to write in all caps. It makes things easier to read and also anonymizes the input, so you're less likely to anchor around hierarchy or role power. Similarly, when it comes to making choices, use structure. It's another place where hierarchy or role power can come into play. Dot voting can give you a quick temperature check, and stack ranking, like we did there, forces hard decisions and prioritization. And if you're evaluating ideas, try using a 2x2 matrix. For example, map things by impact versus effort if you're prioritizing development, or map them as certainty versus implication for prioritizing experiments or research to de-risk your initiatives. These tools help you talk through trade-offs out loud, and it's oftentimes more useful than the decisions that you arrive at themselves. It forces us to pause, zoom out, and point our efforts in the right direction. And that's a lot of what this episode was about. If you're looking to facilitate a workshop with your team and you want to de-risk some important decisions that you need to make, give us a shout at convergence.fm or on our social media DMs, and we'd love to soundboard and de-risk that workshop with you. Thanks a lot for listening, folks. We'll be back next week with another episode on fostering engaged teams who ship delightful products. And we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.